What's up, everybody? This is George C.O.C. Samuels, and you are tuning into a special edition of Faiaside, where we're essentially going to be talking about how wolf packs have inspired Faia, how it relates to communities and technology and our work in that realm. And we're just going to have a sort of panel talk, roundtable discussion with members of the Faia team. So without further ado, just going to bring both of them on. So, all right, first up, maybe let's go from right to left. So, Adam, do you want to just introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Hi, guys. Yeah, my name's Adam Bokert, and I'm an associate of Faiā. I've been working with Faiā for about 6 months now, and really enjoying the space and learning so much, and really enjoying it. So I'm looking forward to hearing some insights from these guys as well, from Kevin. Well, he'll introduce himself in a second. Kevin Pham and George C.O.C. Samuels. So yeah,
thanks, Adam. Kevin, please go ahead and introduce yourself for everybody.
Hey, Kevin Pham. I'm looking at my screen here, and Adam's upside down to me.
Well, luckily he seems the right way for me.
And I'm in Australia, so that could be it. But
okay, well, I'm looking at the YouTube feed.
Oh, okay. So let me put him off and put him on again. Does that help at all? Or is he still upside down? We'll sort that out. Don't worry, Kevin. So while you're giving your introduction, I'll sort out Adam's orientation.
Kevin Pham, longtime Bitcoiner, investor and advisor to Bitcoin companies. Been in the space for over 7 years now, and I'm beginning to work with Faia because I'm getting out of this lone wolf stage that I used to be in, to where I try to do everything myself. And that's exactly what we're going to talk about today.
Awesome. Thanks guys for introducing yourselves, and of course for anyone who's watching this and who doesn't know me, I'm George C.O.C. Samuels, the managing director for Faia, and today we're going to sort of dive in a little bit more into sort of this relationship between wolves, communities, and the work that we do. So there's definitely a different way that we approach our work, and going to help tie it in all together for those who might have been wondering what Faia is about, what exactly we do, and, how we can actually help folks. And then also going to be touching on one of our productivity accelerators called the Pack, which of course ties in very nicely with the theme of wolves. So let me just change our view here. And okay. Oh yeah, look, there you go.
Talking of wolves.
Yeah, talking of wolves, we got a descendant there. Much more tamed version. So yeah, maybe to get us started, what's one question that you guys may have about essentially this wolf theme that I can chat about?
Yeah, well, I've got a question here, George. Is with the wolf theme, where did it come from? I did watch something you did with Michael Hudson, and it was really fascinating. But if you could touch on that for the viewers and listeners, and a bit more of an insight on that from the horse's mouth, so to speak, from you, instead of me just hearing it from the broadcast there, because I'd be really interested to hear where the origin and why it's so important for you, and how it's created this wolf pack, or the pack.
Sure. Good starting question. So, all right. So the original story came from 2008 when I had an encounter in New Zealand, and it actually resulted in a sort of vision that involved two white wolves. This was in Napier in New Zealand, and there was a whole lot of things going on in my life at that point in time, with my own family, with me personally, and there was a vision involving two white wolves. And essentially what happened in this vision, it's the equivalent of probably like, you might hear stories of people who go and get ayahuasca, go through that ayahuasca ceremony. To me, that sort of experience was similar to an ayahuasca experience without the ayahuasca.
Well,
Essentially, in this vision or this dream of mine, I felt like it was very real. I felt like I was stuck in there for decades. And during this time, essentially, these two white wolves with crystal blue eyes had just downloaded all this stuff into my head, and I had no idea what it was about. But essentially, that one experience pushed me down a journey of studying and observing wolves rather obsessively. Because when you have an experience like that, you don't understand it, and so you try to understand it. And this actually led me to connecting with a whole bunch of other people who actually had experienced similar dreams or visions involving white wolves. And at the time, I was actually making a name for myself as a cultural animator. So in my past life, I was actually involved in animation, and the culture animation came from working with the indigenous communities, cultures, and stories. Because a lot of the stories that I grew up with from my upbringing, so I'm part Polynesian from my mother's side, all of that culture sort of influenced a lot of what I was able to connect with from other indigenous folks. And, it really made me tap into a lot of sort of pre-Christian history, pre-Christian belief systems, etc. And when I looked into that, I realized how much actually, got lost as a result of religion. And religion, there's a lot of good things around religion, but also a lot of bad that came with organized religion, let's say. And so this is what sort of influenced my fascination with communities over time. I didn't know that I would eventually land in a role as a community manager in my career path. But essentially, all of this sort of diving into that whole realm of wolves, the mythologies, the connections for some clans around the world. And even actually, the wolf has played a role in sort of the histories and stories of many great empires. I learned that the Mongol Empire, the Mongols themselves believed that they were descendants of the blue wolf. The Turks, the Ottoman Empire, also believed that they had ancestry from wolves too, so they revered it quite heavily. And then, of course, the great Roman Empire, right, from which the Holy Roman Empire was birthed. Also, their story, their mythological story, Romulus and Remus. So the two founders of Rome itself apparently were raised by wolves, right? So this, really made me look into sort of the way that a lot of these empires and these groups, these societies form themselves around, an animal, from the symbolism to just to everything about it. And that's sort of how it started in terms of like the wolf side of things.
Definitely, no, that's a great insight, and it's what I really find interesting as well as the ayahuasca sort of mention there, because it reminds me of the Joe Rogan podcast. He talks about it all the time. Is DMT, ayahuasca, is just on clarifying that. With that, do you think there's another way to get that vision or insight without having that vision come to you, or without having any sort of outside
stimulus?
DMT, stimulus, chemical, natural, because it sounds as if it just came to you. It wasn't sort of
it was just a dream, right?
Yeah, it was just a dream. It's like that Notorious B.I.G. song. It was all a dream. But
magazine.
Exactly, Salt and Pepper.
Yes, it's what I find fascinating is.
Oh, sorry, Adam.
What came to you?
Adam, one quick one. On YouTube, we've got Max Mix saying that your cam is upside down. So maybe if you can switch it.
I can switch. I can watch.
Let's see. Okay, hopefully it actually switches it.
It might not, because it's just
Nope. There it goes.
Is that good?
Yeah, you're right side up.
Oh, okay, great. Oh, but now we've lost the joys of tech.
Is that good?
Kevin? Yeah, is it better now?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
And thanks to Max Mix on YouTube. Appreciate it.
Cheers, Max.
We got Zatoshi as well on Twitter. saying upside down, but there we go.
Send us your
Hey, we're all here.
send us your pay mail or your hand cash handle. We'll tip you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, guys, for the Bitcoiners who are tweeting in at the moment, yeah, send through your hand cash or pay mail.
Satoshi as well. You deserve some love to yourself as well. All that love you've been giving out.
Some Faia.
Some Faiā.
Yeah.
So to speak on your point, Adam, about taking taking substances to kind of have breakthroughs. I had an interesting experience to where I just left corporate banking, and I kind of had I was very alone. I was always in my office, like by myself, and I kind of broke up with my ex and just tried to focus on my career. And there was a time where I took an edible, and then I accidentally mixed it with just wine and like beer and stuff, and I had one cookie for my friend. It was his birthday, and then he said he didn't want it, so I just ate it. And and then I looked up, and then the ceiling was like contracting and expanding and contracting and expanding, and then my friend started like wiggling and stuff. But long story short, yeah, everything started melting away, and my friends were around me, like looking at me, kind of like in the fetal position, like on my bed. And what happened was everything melted away, and I felt like I was transported back to a childlike state. And I was like in a grassy field, and I was very anxious. I had a lot of fear. And then when my friends came around, I felt this safety and security, and everything melted away. And then my friends were just orbs of like light and energy. And like the insight that I had there was just like, all the material and, all our material desires and your career and material things, all that stuff. It's somewhat of an illusion. And like the only, and the insight that I had was like, the only real thing is like our connections and our relationships with one another. And like, we're all just kind of life forces or beings. And that's the only thing that's real. And when I had that breakthrough and I just saw like, everything just snapped into place and made sense to me. It's like always chasing the material, the dead, right? Like I tweeted this thing and I was like, I'm always in my backyard and like, gardening or, playing with bugs or whatever. And I'm like, I want to be surrounded by living things. I want to be surrounded by things that are alive. But then it seems like we always want to be surrounded by things that are dead, right? Like machines and like things and stuff. So yeah, so I wasn't taking ayahuasca, but that was a breakthrough that I had. And the thing was like, I wasn't conscious of it, of like what I was missing. And so my things wasn't wolves, but it was like white orbs of energy. Exactly. And they represented like my very close friends, and that gave me safety. And I had that insight, and that insight still impacts me to today.
Yep, exactly. And it's fascinating, right? That these sort of experiences, I've actually, even with a lot of my entrepreneurial friends or business friends, these sort of conversations I've had with many of them, but you don't often talk about it openly, right? In the business world, because we all put on a mask or a facade as well about being professional for whatever that means.
Yeah. Or we're killing it. Everybody's killing it,
Everybody's killing it. Yeah, take over the world, these sort of things.
Cool.
Exactly. And, there's this great meme I saw one time where it's like, two groups of people or the same group of people. And, there's a leader saying, who wants change? And everybody's like, yeah, me. And then who wants to change? Nobody wants to change, right? Everybody's so focused on changing the outside world, but they forget to look within. And I didn't expect us to, go into this side of things for this particular episode, but it's good that we are. I think back to your question before, Adam, around sort of, is there a way to get to that same level or insight, right, moment without the need for external stimulus or what have you? I'm not too sure, right? Because even for my situation, I think from what I learned by doing my own research as well, is that generally you will have either something really, really big happen in your life, right? That pushes you to the edge, right?
Catalyst.
Catalyst, exactly. And I think what was happening for my own family at the time was the catalyst for that experience in New Zealand. What actually led me to New Zealand was a dream before that I had back in my own family home. And literally the dream just told me to go to New Zealand. And it was wild because I was like trusting this dream of mine, which I didn't even know was true or not. But something kept telling me I just needed to go. And, you know, because I grew up in a household where essentially dreams were considered a way into our sort of deeper truth, you know, like culturally, like a lot of Polynesian families, you know, believe in the power of dreams. So I brought up with that just being normal. But during this time of upheaval for our family, you know, it was coming out even stronger. And a lot of the times when we are working, we keep ourselves busy and we don't allow ourselves to go that deep, you know. But because of all this stuff that was this emotional trauma, if you want to call it that was happening, it was pushing me to have these sort of insights. And that's what pushed me to New Zealand. And so 2008, right, if you look at what was happening in the world at that time, birth of Bitcoin around that period, and many other things from then on. We had the global financial crisis as well. So I started to see the world a lot more connected in that way or manner. And having grown up in the Western parts of the world, you know, this was interesting to see how a lot of my cultural roots were just being forced out. And it forced me to also tap into like wisdom of the elders and ancestors, right? The more I spent time with the indigenous, the more I realized that a lot of their ways is similar to our Polynesian ways. And then I would go to the Philippines, and then I'd learn from, you know, about the indigenous groups in the Philippines, and many of their pre-Christian communities and cultures also had similar beliefs. Native Americans, even in Sweden, I went to visit my friend in Sweden. I learned that the original natives of Sweden are not even white. You know, they are fair-looking, Native American-looking indigenous groups like the Sami. The Sami, actually, if you look them up, and I'm going to put this in the chat even for our YouTubers, the Sami peoples, it's crazy. They look like fair-skinned Native Americans, you know? And this is what got me really fascinated in communities, culture, and sort of ancient wisdoms. And that is something that I then went on to learn from another woman in the United States who actually also had an encounter with white wolves, where she shared with me how, you know, a lot of different tribes would have wolves as their sort of clan totem, right? And recently I put out an episode about clans because my sort of gut feel is that as we went open, wide networks with social networks for our society, we then, Satoshi has put a dragon there. Yes, that's another totem. As we went in the digital realm, right, as we went wide and open, we've now found ourselves coming back to smaller, more trusted groups. And once upon a time, you know, we had things like clans and brotherhoods and, you know, these type of groups, kinship systems. So if you actually look into kinship systems back in the day, they actually were quite ingenious because these kinship systems were also tied to nature. And so by tying their sort of social organization to nature, it meant that they were, by default, having to protect what was in their physical environments because it was tied to their identity. If you look at sort of capitalism, if you look at the way that we have now sort of developed things in the world, we've divorced ourselves from nature in terms of identity, right? Nature is something to be used or exploited, or it's separate. Whereas back in the day with these clans and kinship systems, they had some form of nature. A totem could actually be like an oak tree, right? So because the oak tree was part of a family clan identity, they protected that. And because everybody was sort of assigned a different part of nature, everybody was protecting nature naturally. And so once we divorced ourselves from that, we lost our relationship with these things. So we lost our relationship with place. We lost then relationship with people because the kinship systems were no longer there, right? So you no longer remembered sort of your blood ties to everybody. That was one form of connection. and things just kind of got divorced that way. And you'll notice this too, even with the way that we sort of trade, right? Commerce. The way that our relationship to products is that it's separate. We don't think about the chicken, from which we, get our sustenance from. We don't think about a relationship to them because somebody else, killed it, and it's something that we're just buying off a shelf. And see, I see all these things play out even in the business realm when we are now actually in the business of building community. It's all about identity and belonging. And so a lot of these sort of things that I observed and learned, now people are paying us for this understanding and also this interaction with communities that they're looking to build as well. But there's obviously, sometimes there's conflict because we're using payments, money, as a way to sort of buy and build community, right? So this is another area. But yeah, that's sort of my main answer to that.
So George, what would you say that society, what type of knowledge do you think society lost from kind of the transition from indigenous culture to kind of, Western, Judeo-Christian market-based cultures based on, democracy and the importance of the individual?
Yeah. So this is the interesting thing. So because I've grown up in a bunch of different places, right? I would say at this point in time, I'm very much lean towards Taoism with the yin yang, right? Sort of like I can see that one symbol, the yin yang symbol, applied to everything. So what I saw happening was in indigenous cultures, any sort of culture that puts a lot of emphasis on the collective. You can go to the extreme there, where you then saw what happened with communism, right? That's the extreme form of collectivism. But then you had the other extreme, which was individualism, right? Which is what we had with the West. And you can see the extremes of that too, not being a good thing. And so I think the truth is somewhere in between. I kind of see this, we went too extreme to individualism, and now we actually need to kind of go back to understand and see actually what worked with the more collectivist groups, if you want to call them that, and get that sort of yin-yang balance, right? Because as we go through time, there's no one right answer for all situations. Some situations might call for individualism. Some situations might call for collectivism, right? If you look at even the stats of how people have been able to respond to COVID-19 right now, right, it's very fascinating. A lot of the Western countries that are very individualistic have not responded as well to many of the countries that would be typically seen as more socialist, right, or more collectivist, right? Many Asian cultures, right, which some might look at as more authoritarian. This is, a sort of an example of that. And so I think when it comes to, democracy and what's lost, I think it's just going to the extremes and thinking that because, you've sort of seen the light of the opposite, that you forget completely, the other side. You could tie this into sort of shadow work, in psychology when they talk about that, the ego or the shadow side of ourselves. We also need to learn to understand and integrate. Otherwise, that gets sort of projected out onto the world. And I'm sure we can see that too, when we don't look at the opposite.
No, interesting. No, I had a personal experience with that. So it's crazy, man. So I looked at the movie Fight Club, and I don't know, my life kind of tracked with that because I kind of I worked and I wanted to be like an individual success, a millionaire or billionaire, and I wanted all these material things like Edward Norton wanted. But then also with that, I was always trying to please everybody else instead of being my own person. And I kind of lost my identity. And then when I quit my job and I started, doing the Wells Fargo thing and the Bitcoin thing, and I had the neck tattoo and all that other stuff, I was embracing my individualism again. And I think I needed to explore that because I was so kind of conformist within the existing, just kind of like the corporate system, and trying to do what's right, for my clients and my company and all the other stuff. But the thing is that I felt like after a while, I felt like I went to the opposite extreme to where I made money individually by speculating in Bitcoin and Ethereum and stuff like that, and I didn't need anybody else. But I found that there was a lot of downsides to being a lone wolf, to where like I was becoming like an asshole. Like I was becoming like a worse person because I didn't have anybody else to be accountable for, or anybody else to show me my my blind spots. And I felt that like the longer I'm alone, the more kind of just alienated I'm going to be from other people. So like, but then I think the reason why I left was because or the reason why I didn't want to go back to working for a corporation or a team is because the last corporation that I worked for didn't align with my values, and I feared losing autonomy and control again. It's like it's almost like people who are having trust issues coming out of a bad relationship.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And then when I reached out to you and we're like, I really like being my own person and speaking my truth and stuff like that. But can we find a middle ground to kind of introduce me back to a pack? Like I feel like I'm one of those like dogs in like Caesar Milan, that show, and he's just like an asshole to everybody, kind of. And then he's like, "Oh, we have to rehabilitate the dog and stuff like that." And then he gets reintroduced to the pack, and like he doesn't follow the rules and stuff like that. But yeah, I feel that I started at one extreme to where I was always people pleasing, trying to please my company, and I went to the other extreme to where I just did my own thing, did whatever I wanted, and then now I'm coming back, and I think that America is kind of going through that path as well, to where we're very anti-communist, so we go extreme to the individualism side, and then now everybody's all depressed and nihilistic and addicted to drugs and committing suicide.
Hit the nail on the head.
And they're trying to find a way back, but then if you notice, there's always these connections here. Like anytime you talk about like a group or anything like that in Bitcoin, people scream and accuse you of socialism. Right? And I think it's the same thing. I think it's the same thing as America. Like anytime you talk about, doing something for the good of the whole, they scream socialism. And I think it's that extreme. And also, I know Ayn Rand is very big in Bitcoin, and she's all about individualism and objectivism and reason. And my theory is that I believe she came from a communist country, and she was scarred from that.
Correct.
So then she had a very extreme knee-jerk reaction to that, and then was all about the individual and stuff like that. So to connect all the dots, I think America, Bitcoin, me, Faiā, all that, we're trying to find the middle ground, because I think like America, Bitcoiners are very, very abrasive. And I think that you and Faiā, you can kind of impart the knowledge that we lost from the indigenous people to teach us how to find that middle ground.
And it's the middle way. I think what you were talking about, right? There's sorry, I think I'm just hearing an echo from someone. I don't know who it is, but let me just see. Give me 1 second. Just switch on and off. Okay. I think Kevin, what you speak about is on point. Where, especially with Ayn Rand and like unhealed. So there is there is a lot of people who are hurt, damaged, traumatized, and in a response to that trauma, they then go out and project that into the world. Then what that does is that also attracts other people who have that similar type of trauma. And that's actually what gives way to many dictators as well, charismatic leaders, people who can relate to that sort of maybe insecurity or those unbalanced ways, because being balanced and centered is not sexy. You know, I was just having this talk to Adam earlier about this article that I came across. And the article is, let's see if I can find it. Yeah, so the article, I'm going to actually share my screen and see if this works well. Give me 1 second, guys. Okay. Let me know when you guys can see this. Can you see anything yet?
Nothing yet. No.
Not yet? Okay.
Well,
How about now?
Colin Keeley.
Sweet. Okay, so let me see if I can just do this. Maybe I'll take I don't know if I can take myself out. Okay. So now, okay, so there's this article from Andrew Wilkinson, from Colin Keeley, but by Andrew Wilkinson. And it's this Andrew Wilkinson was the guy responsible for MetaLab. And MetaLab essentially were responsible for designing the apps for Slack, Uber, the Vice mobile platform, I think something else to do with Google. So a lot of really big, well-known brands. And his sort of approach to business is he looks at, more profitable businesses, but typically unsexy. And he says, in private equity and especially in the startup world, people try to focus on the unicorns all the time, but it actually leaves a very wide open gap for companies who are a lot more sustainable, who are actually profitable, don't damage a lot of people in the process, and are actually going to be around. It talks about just sort of what is kind of wrong at the moment and why we have so much fascination with these things that are sexy, but when you look under the hood are actually quite damaging, right? There's definitely an attitude of, go big or go home, which nothing wrong with that, right? But it's definitely based more around gambling, really, if you look at it, right? And a lot of people who are addicted to that find the thrill of it, and so they're attracted to that. And that is just because it's more legitimized, and it's more popular, that's what people think they need to be following. But I'll share this article with everyone because I'll put it into the chat, and then I'll bring you guys back on. Give me 1 second. So I'm just going to put it into the chat. This kind of really gave me a lot of food for thought about the direction of even Faia. Right, and like what we're trying to do. And if you look at, there's a video about wolves called "How Wolves Change Rivers." And for those that are watching, if you haven't heard of it before, I highly recommend you check it out. I'm going to type it into the chat on our YouTube live stream. This video talks about how wolves, when they were reintroduced into Yellowstone National Park, they had such a crazy impact on the ecosystem that they changed the flow of the rivers. When they were pretty much hunted to extinction, it actually caused an overgrowth in all the other populations, right? And so with Faia, kind of looking at the same approach, whereby like wolves, we might be in the background, in sort of the shadows, always kind of felt and always kind of known, but not needing to be constantly in your face to everybody, right? And that sort of our approach is going to be is more about like harmonizing ecosystems, right? Because I think that is what will lead to more sustainability. But this takes a lot of long work. Wolves are known to be quite endurant and persistent. And so, the way that they take down prey, and you can look at prey as sort of your goals, is they run it down, right, over time. They just keep going and they work together, right? And that's how they're able to tackle prey 5-10 times larger than itself. And so that gives a lot of lessons for even how teams operate. You don't necessarily need to have every single person on the team be like an all-star, right? A team that just knows how to work well together can often outperform, even other all-star teams. I think there was a classic example of in ice hockey about the Russian team versus like the Canadians or the Americans or something during the Olympics. The Russians didn't have all of these well-known stars, right, by name individually, but together they were a force to be reckoned with, and then they were just literally dominating. But you never know their names individually. And this, shows sort of like the differences between cultures and also sort of the approach. But yeah, that's something that definitely has been on my mind, and is sort of like the approach that we take.
Just what was that? If I can say that that really.
If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together.
Correct.
And also the wolf the wolf quote.
The strength of the wolf is the pack. The strength of the pack is the wolf. Yes.
Yeah, and then looking empirically in history, I was just thinking about this. I'm just thinking about like the most long-lived civilizations or people. And like what is their kind of MO or how they go about things. And I think about like, the Jewish people are all about keeping their culture and keeping things within the family.
Yep.
Chinese, keeping their culture, keeping things within the family. And and the thing is like Americans, we've been around for a couple hundred years. It's like a speck in the grand scheme of things.
Yep.
Whereas the people that try to be extreme, the grand empires, right? Egypt, Rome, and you could say, America is somewhat kind of showing cracks. But it seems that like every empire, or the USSR, or every empire that tried to be extreme and take over the world, crumbled, right?
Yep.
Whereas the ones that just, kept things close, tried to keep their culture and keep the bonds and the familial values, they've lasted thousands of years.
100%. And you take a look now, that's probably a good segue into technology and our relationship with technology, right? We've essentially, in a way, like delegated or outsourced a lot of our identities and knowledge and content into technology. We almost look at technology to save us a lot of the time. But, at the end of the day, in my opinion, it's still like they're just tools. Right.
Yeah.
And technologies, people don't often think about technology being a hammer, right? These days we think of, machines, AI, that sort of stuff as being technology. And so although our technologies have become more sophisticated, human beings have remained the same in many ways. And even in individualist societies, right? If you associate yourself under the title of individualist, like you've already taken on socialist behavior, right? In a way, or collectivist behavior, because you are rallying under an identity with others who also believe that they are individualists, right? There's like no escaping it. And so sometimes I wonder if, we are constantly trying to bash against, socialism and collectivism and all this stuff when it's in our natures to kind of band together to do things. And I think this is why wolves have had such a prominent part in many different civilizations' histories, because they actually sort of help us go back to the roots of like what is actually important, with wolves, and they have this sort of distinction between wolves and dogs, whereby, wolves show the power of having a strong individual personality. So wolves are actually very hard to tame, right? It takes a lot longer to tame them or domesticate them, right? Actually, you probably don't want to domesticate them without, breeding with other dogs or something. But with wolves, the relationship is such that you have to earn their trust and respect. Then they cooperate much better, right? And yet they are very well known for their cooperative behavior when it comes to hunting. And they have that balance.
Yeah, so that segues to like the second question that I want to ask is right. So then like what are the key characteristics or like the key like best practices to maintain a healthy, long-lived community?
I think one, the whole, what I was talking about with the kinship systems, right? You were talking about families, right? Many cultures that have strong sort of family ties. So whether it be, Jewish, Chinese clans, or even if you look at the Sikh families too, right? I remember learning from one of my Sikh brothers about how, like, across the world they've got like this directory of every single family still till today or something, where they can just tap into to see who's where when moving around. And it's very fascinating to see that. So there's one sort of like that sense of family. So there needs to be something around like a family tie, whether that is by blood, whether that is by adoption or something of the sort. That seems to be something that ties in the long run. Typically with many of these families, there are always these founder stories, or like a matriarch or patriarchal story. You'll see even within sort of the founding of civilizations, you have the founder story, right, which can become almost mythological. So I think even Satoshi had put down a dragon or something earlier in the chats. But even a mythological creature can be a sort of anchor point. If we translate that into brands of today, you can start to see sort of what are the anchor points for that brand that brings people together.
A lot of
right?
symbology, so much symbology.
Exactly.
Massive, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Now, some people have used that in the past to deceive or manipulate, right? Whereas others have been able to use it wisely and use it for good, for positive reasons. And so, yeah, the symbolism is definitely a huge part. Families also will have their family crests, right? And they use that as a way of pride, to be proud. And I think that's something that also needs to be inherent if you're looking at trying to build a community that lasts. Secret societies, religions, right? They have a lot of good lessons around building things that last. I think on Twitter, was it Twitter? Yeah, on Twitter, somebody actually shared a book resource with me. I want to put it into the chat again as well. So this book is called Religion. Wait, hold on. Is it Religion for Atheists, a non-believer's guide to the uses of religion? Right? So even though atheists may hate religion, there's a lot of things that they have done right when it comes to building communities and social groups that last. Right? And so I found that
having a common set of values.
Yep. Right. But I think even with values, right, that alone might not be enough. Right. But it's definitely an important part because you could still have like a lot of different families that might have different values, but the community, so their sort of sense of belonging to the community comes from maybe just association. It might not necessarily be because that they have the same values. Because even my family, even though we're part Polynesian, I'm a mixed kid, right? So I've got mixed blood, and I've been very westernized. So there's a lot about what I value today that might actually be in conflict with, say, even the Samoan culture or the Tuvaluan culture. Like
the intuition I get is like, I think we're all kind of like black sheeps of our communities or our families. And maybe that's why we're a group of black sheep. I don't know if you feel the same, Adam. Have you ever felt that you were different or you were
100%? Yeah, because we talked about I was actually born in Australia, but then only for a year, and then I grew up in England. However, my mum is mixed race. She is half Filipino and half Chinese, and she grew up in Manila in the Philippines, and I grew up in England. So I've got the Western influence from England, based from my father, and then on my mother's side, she's heavily influenced because she grew up in the Philippines, even though her dad and my granddad was Chinese. So there's a massive mix. So yeah, I agree, Kevin. I'm
the
bit
same
like the
way.
black sheep, but then I think that's how you kind of connect together. I'm
the same way. So basically, my family comes from South Vietnam, which was very allied with the West and the French, and then the Americans. And the French brought over Catholicism, and they really westernized our culture. And I think I have a little bit of French blood within me. But then, they lost the war, and then they immigrated to the U.S. So yeah, I had my toes, at home. We would speak Vietnamese, eat, Asian food, have our Confucian values, but then I'd go to, Catholic church, and then just, be immersed in, Western culture, which is all about individualism. And I think that with us people from our background, we always have that conflict between collectivism, doing what the family wants, and doing what the community wants, or doing what the church wants, and then doing what we want, right? I think, right? You think every kind of Asian American or whatever kid, they all have that same thing. So, well, that's interesting. It seems that we are all people that were kind of felt out of place because we were actually very centered between the East and the West.
Correct.
So yeah, I just had that insight right now.
And coming on to what back to what George was saying as well, we're all individuals, but then we feel strong. We initially that lone wolf, but then when we come together, we still got that individualism and that character and strength, but then even stronger with the balance as well. And that's what I really love about Faiā and the team that's developing. And even though it's we're on this journey, we've come through COVID and going through it. I think it's really exciting. At the same time, I had that memory what you were talking about in the past of feeling like a black sheep, but it's all for the right reason at the right time. It's all connected. It goes back to the yin and yang as well, and I love all this symbology, and we've got everyone's connected, but at the same time we've got the use of symbology, the wolf business. We've got George's insights and knowledge. I mean, and they've got yourself.
There's people.
It's amazing.
There's people involved in all these organizations, so that's the common key. But I think that the fact that we're all able to empathize with being black sheep, that's also what creates kinship. And I think the connection is that I'm so enamored with Singapore because I think it's just like this perfect balance of East and West, right? Where they still have the Singaporean identity, the group identity, and then they have the individual ethnic groups identity, but also they have the democratic system that protects rights of individuals. And to me, that's the future. And then that's why, I think you're drawn to Singapore, and that's why Faia is in Singapore. So I think the combination between East and West is the way forward. And I think countries like Singapore, Taiwan, Japan, South Korea, they are so high functioning because they've somehow found that balance.
Exactly. And it's interesting that we talk about this sort of overlap as well, because that was another reason why I called Faia. So Faia, it's the Samoan word, right, for spanning two divides, like a bridge. And then the other interesting thing I learned about Faia is that when you combine it into the word Faiaonga, it means teacher in Samoan. And I've noticed that people who have been drawn to Faia too, our team, we can actually take on a very advisory mentor type role for other businesses, right? And so, the honest truth about Faia as well is that when I came here, a lot of it was instinct driven, right? When I created the company, it was instinct driven, just like when I was drawn to New Zealand. And everything did turn out sort of in the right way because I learned to trust that intuition. And that's something that came with Wolf. It was actually a lot of lessons around trusting my gut when there were a lot of conflicting things happening in my life. Yeah. Because that's actually when you lose clarity, where you cannot hear that inner voice. And so Faia is sort of that culmination of those things. And so
I had this joke with people. I joke with people, like I say, I don't read books because it was oh, did you read this book? Read this book, this philosopher or whatever. And the thing is, I read on the internet all the time, but then basically I find that when people are solely enamored with other people's stories, they start doing what other people have done and it's not right for them, as opposed to just listening to what's inside. So, when you listen to yourself, that's when you started Faia or the pack.
Yep.
Wait,
Both,
so what started first, the pack or Faiā?
The pack actually started first, so that's a good segue. I'll put the link in to the comments for those who are tuning in. Satoshi's been a great listener, and then I'll also put it on YouTube. Okay, so yeah, the pack. So the pack, it's very fascinating. I mean, there's so many things that you guys are saying, which obviously resonates, and that's why we're working together as a team. But the pack started in 2016, and at a time when I was in between jobs as well. So I just finished up my job at the co-working space that I was at, and then I was on the hunt for my next thing. But when I was on the hunt for my next job, I wanted to get something that I felt like was truly aligned with where I wanted to go, right? And during this time, I felt like it was getting very lonely, while trying to go on the hunt for a job. And so I thought, well, wouldn't it be great if I actually just sort of banded together a group of people towards goals, right? And then I would just utilize a system that I kind of like started doing myself that worked for me, but then leverage off of the power of the pack to be able to run together in these sort of sprint cycles.
So you combine other people that were kind of alone.
Yeah.
As well. Right.
Yes, many of them were feeling alone, right? So what was interesting is that the initial group of people, either they were on the hunt for their next job, or they had just started their business, or they were actually working for a larger company, and they had a team, but they still felt alone within that team, right? That's what I found fascinating as well, because the example for that last one is that there are professionals who are part of a team where they might be the high performer, and actually maybe the rest of the team isn't high performing. And so then
there's that notion, like there's that saying that people say, you can be alone and not feel lonely, and you can be with the wrong people and feel extremely lonely. Right? And I this is kind of a tangent, but I think what's becoming clear to me was that I didn't want to be a lone wolf. I wanted to be very judicious and choosy with the people that I align myself with.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to make sure that they were aligned, right?
Yep.
So I've come to that realization. I didn't want to be alone. I wanted to, it's like getting out of a bad relationship. I wanted to be very thoughtful that the people that I align myself with kind of share my values and my background.
That's super important though with joining communities as well. It's making sure that it's the right people with the same values, sort of similar values that does help as well. And that's something I found as I got older and started to understand and listen to my, like George said, listen to my gut feel. You start to feel that what feels right, and if you get that fix, say if you walk into a room, sometimes I imagine I walk into a room and you could have your eyes closed, and if you feel a bad vibe, I used to kind of ignore it, and I kind of connect with people and then go past it, and then I'd always 9 times out of 10 regret it, and then now I listen, gut, and I listen into it. For example, joining the pack, any communities that are that feel aligned and it feels right, because you can test the waters as well, and then it just goes from there, and you develop those connections, relationships, and that's what I really really like about the pack as well, because you can kind of test the waters a bit as well.
Yeah, to see if it works for you. Yeah, and it seems like everybody's kind of centered around the Asia Pacific. So back to the pack, it sounds that like the culture of the group is like everybody's a high performer. Mm-hmm. Or everybody's very driven.
Yep. Or they could have just simply found themselves off path again, right? They could have found themselves like having lost their motivation or sense of clarity. And we've got some other people tuning into the chat, which is great. For those of you that are tuning in, I will feature your questions and comments soon, so we can chat about those a little bit further. But when it comes to sort of the discerning side, right? Like this is why now, I think just as recent as this week, came across sort of like a line, for Faia, where we say we believe in the power of the small and uncommon, right? Because this is very much like the wolf energy around small wolf packs being able to bring things much larger than them down, right? Through patience and persistence. But by having groups that are smaller, it makes it easier for trust and it makes things more efficient, right? And it's fascinating to see this play out in the world, right? Even on a business standpoint, because the big incumbents are going to be having a huge, a difficult period during this time compared to the maybe smaller agile, right? During times of crisis. It's much harder to shift, a massive armada than it is to, have a little agile fleets being able to disperse as they need to. And I think that might actually be the solution to a lot of scale when people are talking about scale. But there was a tweet that went out recently too about, we need to stop looking at the follower counts or just the numbers alone. And that, and then I added to that tweet saying, can we have, more companies actually measure relationship strength, right? Because it's so true that these days, it's not necessarily just how many people you have in your network, right? That actually means nothing if you don't have strong relationships with them, right? But it's like, what is the relationship strength that you have within your group, no matter how large? Because that will give you a very different insight into the groups, whereby right now we're so used to looking at, oh, somebody has 1 million followers, but then you might go to their tweet, their profile, the Twitter profile, and their posts are getting like 10 likes, a pop. Then you go, something's wrong there, If this guy says he's got like 1 million followers or something, but then he's only got, like 10 likes per post. And so the power of small, the pack itself is something that is intentionally small. And what was the name of, I think there was a term, an anthropological term for
Lindy.
groups that, sorry?
Or no.
I don't know if it was called, I don't think it was called Bond, but essentially groups of 30 to 50 being sort of the
Dunbar.
No, Dunbar is 150.
It's another number.
It's another number that's specifically for about 30 to 50, which we've also seen play out in our pack. So the productivity accelerator, whereby that's sort of like even a max, right? Number of people that you can get to before people start losing that familial feel with one another, that you can remember everybody's names, right? That you can be able to talk openly without fear of judgment or some stranger looking into something you're talking about.
Yeah. Or the quality of the group being diluted.
Correct.
So that goes up. But that's interesting because that is kind of in direct kind of contradiction to the Silicon Valley hyperscale billion user behemoth.
Yep.
Right. And I think that the trade-off is longevity.
Yep. Longevity?
Longevity. Sorry.
Yes.
Yeah, longevity. That's the word I was looking for.
Yep.
Whereas these things can just with Twitter or Facebook or whatever social media thing, tries to include everybody. It seems like they can lose, their secret sauce and then just flame out.
Correct.
Whereas it seems like if the pack, if it's managed properly and you're very kind of guarded and judicious with who you allow in, can allow it to be a very long-lived organization. But the trade-off is that, it doesn't seem that, you're going to hyperscale and, have, 9 figures in revenue, in a short amount of time from zero to 100. But it sounds like it can be a sustainable business for a long term or So there seems to be a correlation between size and longevity. And so then the bigger the empire or the bigger the company, the more short-lived its life. The smaller the empire or the group or the company, it can be more long-lived. Like you see, like Berkshire Hathaway, and it's just basically been Warren Buffett and his BFF,
Charles Munger.
Yeah, for 50 years, right? And they've been around forever, right? And they probably know each other more than each other their respective lives do.
Exactly.
Yeah. Whereas you have like a Lehman Brothers or Bear Stearns, and they just try to get as big as possible, make as much money as possible, and then just disappeared.
Exactly. And I think if I was to look at sort of role models or groups to learn from, Berkshire Hathaway definitely, I would far prefer that type of business, or even like the Kaufman group. So I think it's Ewing Marion Kaufman. That guy is another really interesting entrepreneur. But it was all centered around closeness, right? Small groups, smarter, wiser, might not be as sexy, but they can build generational wealth, or they can build long-term wealth, and they do so without damaging the people that are in their cohort, or damaging the environment around them, right? And I think that is probably the direction that we'd go with Faia, right? And then those who work with us is going to be based on trust, and so there's no need for us to be able to just hit numbers for the sake of numbers, because you were talking about the longevity, right? And I know, at least in business, they have LVCs, lifetime value of a customer. For a business that is more interested in that type of way of working, LVC is going to be a lot more important than just straight up revenue. Revenue is important, but lifetime value of a customer is going to become even more so. And so if you start looking at these things like relationship strength, lifetime value of a customer, it gives you a very different approach to the way that you do business. Because now also the type of numbers you're following is not as transactional. It actually now pays to build trusting relationships. It pays to spend time being discerning with people that you bring into your group, or bring on as clients even. And sometimes that has happened for me, right? Where I've actually, so going back to the story of how the pack started, when I was on the hunt for a job, I turned down some other positions. So I had 3 offers to be CEOs for smaller companies, right? But I actually waited, even though it was painful. I waited until there was an opportunity that popped up for the corporate that I ended up going for, right? So I became an enterprise community manager for a larger fintech company, as opposed to a CEO, right? Which would have been more about the title than it was for what I felt was right and what I needed to learn. And what I wanted to learn there was, how do things work on the inside and the back end for a lot of these big banks and institutions, right? To see how things flowed, what the people were like, how communities operate within these organizations. Because, let's face it, these larger organizations, they have employee communities, right? They are literally their own villages. And so, I just sort of brought that approach into those environments. Yeah. Now, I realize we have been on for quite some time. I think, what is it, an hour? We an hour in now? Yeah, I think it's about an hour. Is there a kettle going on? So yeah, Adam, I haven't
Cup of tea. Sorry.
That's right. Yeah, did you have any sort of comments or questions there?
Yeah, well, it's more of a comment. It's more about what came up for me in the kind of discussion there is, especially with the pack, is how it tends to once it's nurtured, and you got the sort of the right people coming in for the right reasons, similar sort of values, and wanting to, they're lone wolf, they wanted to go somewhere. It's more of a even starts to organically develop into a self-managing team, so to speak. So they're in small groups that go off, because what I've experienced in the pack as just the organic nature of it, and how there's many leaders within there that with different skill sets, with different strengths, different values, but very, very relatively similar, with lots of different goals. But what happens is the relationships build, and then there's a self-managing nature of it, which I think is amazing. Which for me, I feel there's so much value there for whether it's a one-person lone wolf, or even even a team of entrepreneurs, or a startup that could benefit from that, because of just how much you learn from it. So that, for me, that's what I got from it, and that's what I like to contribute as well, because it's not just you talked about transactional, and we're moving away from that, and I really find it interesting with the how you can, and I'm trying to imagine how you'd be able to measure the relationships as well, how that scale would be, because those sorts of ideas I find quite interesting on how that can come to be and how that can be input into the communities. And I do like and one last thing as well, I love the idea of scale, but not for its own sake, because I believe it's important to scale things if it's for the right cause and it's going to create a great result for as many people as possible, and it's going to create a change, but not just for numbers, not just for revenue. For me, it's important, and that's with the self-managing teams, self-managing nature of communities. That is a great sort of starting point. So that's the main things I got from this discussion and what I've learned from the pack so far and Faia.
Yeah, it seems like self-management is correlated with the quality of the people that you bring in.
Yeah.
Right? To where, they're saying like, you want to hire people that are either, smarter or know something that you don't, and then you just like let them do their thing.
Let them do it.
As opposed to people that, are, not exceptional or anything, and they're just kind of middle of the road, and then you just kind of have to micromanage them to get things done or do things correctly. So so I think it's a testament of being mindful about the quality of the person that you bring into the pack.
Exactly. And there's a factor of money, right? Like I think we talked about this before, Kevin, in terms of skin in the game, right? Yep. So one interesting behavior we noticed in the pack is that when we were experimenting with things, we did bring some people into the pack as under like scholarships or something, right? Or we'd look at potentially doing some sort of trade. But we noticed that people who didn't put any skin in the game valued the program differently, and so this is how I saw that sort of correlation even with like the Bitcoin world, right? And sort of how mining systems work. And a lot of people, when they look at Faia and they're like, what's the connection there with Bitcoin? Well, the way that I see how Bitcoin works is inspired biologically, by nature. And wolves have been my sort of biologically inspired part of nature as well, in terms of the way that I look at how groups are organized. And then when, even at the last conference we were at for CoinGeek, right, the N-Chain group and Craig Wright even talked about sort of the next evolution and talking about the Bitcoin layer network. And they were talking about the communities of miners, right? These same structures and small world networks, it all plays a part in how communities are formed too. And, this I saw as the connection of like, what is going to be coming? And I think what will come is that like, we have all this infrastructure stuff that's happened, right? Where that is looking at scale, right? So we're looking at sort of the platforms and the places, right? From which all life forms then come onto and into. And so wolves provide sort of the organizational aspect and how things interact, and they influence that within those ecosystems, right? But I look at Bitcoin and some of these other platforms or creators helping to create the physical environments, right? Or digital, if we want to look at it that way. And so while everybody in the Bitcoin world may be looking at just the technological aspects, I'm looking at the next part, which has to do with the people side and how we interact with this new environment that gets formed, right? Because one of the things that I personally feel is that, I've seen in a lot of different workplaces how a lot of folks feel left behind when new technologies come in. So instead of waiting for that shit to happen, how about, start educating people about some of those things now and get them ready and prepared. And COVID-19 has kind of forced people to get sort of more ready than before. But I think Faia can have a place in that area whereby we can help assist, teach teams, teach communities, teach companies about some of these emerging tools and technologies, right? Then also provide ways to improve their productivity through things we learned from the pack. And then also provide the sort of executional, functional tasks that come with sort of growing or building communities, which of course, includes marketing, social media, ad management, etc. Like those are the functional things. Yeah. But how we separate ourselves is through those other aspects.
So then if you can kind of make the connection to Bitcoin, the small world network, like ideally the members of the pack are all kind of big, highly connected miners, right?
Yep.
And they form like a small world network, and then they connect you to basically the rest of the world. And you can say that, the pack might, ideally in the future kind of resemble, other kind of very powerful, highly connected groups in society, or like secret societies that people say
Yep.
that are able to impact things like all over the world, right? So basically, these high leverage people, but then it's within a kind of small contained group.
Correct. And this is the power of small too. We look at the one percenters. If you don't think this is a thing, right? The one percenters are a small group of people that have a massive influence of the rest of the population. People get mad about it. But I say, instead of getting mad about it, like understand, go back to the roots, see why this is the case. There is power in the small. And I think as people start to understand this, and especially as, even for myself, as I age and mature, some of the old advice around people, your friends, make sure that you choose your friends wisely, right? Who you hang around. All that stuff becomes even more so or more true as you get older.
And like the higher you go up, the more, the more you have to audit and really assess the quality of your network. And sometimes you have to purge and just sometimes you got to trim the fat. Sometimes, and it's almost like Bitcoin, right? It's the thing is that if the miner can't keep up, then they're going to fall off from being in the center of the network.
Correct.
Right. So, what I'm finding personally is that I find it hard, or I wonder if I'm a mean person. But I feel that I'm progressing and I'm getting to a certain level, and sometimes I need to leave some people behind.
Yeah.
Or I say that, I don't feel you're growing with me, and I have to leave you behind, or I'm just upfront with this person that I don't see a long-term, future, because I don't feel that our growth, the rate of our growth is similar. So can you speak on that regarding communities and groups? Because obviously you don't want to leave people behind, right? That doesn't seem like that's a healthy.
So there's a quote, culture eats strategy for breakfast, right? So the type of culture you sort of create can either make those sort of decisions harder or easier, right? Now, of course, there are sort of relationships that come outside of your communities or groups, right? But within a community, if there's a situation whereby you feel like somebody's being left behind, in a wolf pack, like there are stories about how wolves sometimes might have to cut their losses, right, and leave one behind, or sometimes even chew their own leg off, right, to help the rest of the pack. And you'll notice even the Japanese, remember the kamikaze, right?
Yeah. Divine wind,
right? They would sacrifice themselves for the greater whole, and that stuff is powerful, right? Because it's go for it.
But on the flip side, in the U.S. Army or the American Army, it's all about no man left behind.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Yeah, it was in that movie, A Letter from Iwo Jima, right? So I think in the movies, The Letters of Iwo Jima, which is like we're gonna die, for this. And then on the kind of the mirror flip side image, it was the Americans who were always trying to go back for their things, so they started targeting medics because they're always trying to there's resources. So it's very, very interesting.
Very good point.
I think what they're trying to say is like there's probably some type of balance.
80-20, yin and yang, right?
Yeah.
So there are going to be some members who. And so this is the thing. I think on the whole, even for our pack, we try to have it be so that nobody gets left behind, right? Yeah. But then we also need to be honest too, right?
Yeah, but then if there's like a person that's just toxic, or they're a straggler and they're just like
then I leave you behind,
holding everybody back, then you have to make the decision that's best for the group, right?
Right. And then
so then George, what would you say is kind of like the archetypical pack member that you would like to join, or that would find value in joining the pack?
Yeah. I mean, Kevin, you're probably one of them. It's like I think folks who definitely find themselves on that sort of lone wolf path, who have been trying to do everything on their own and struggling, to sort of get themselves out of their own rut, because there's only so much you can do, right?
Yeah. But they've had success individually. and then they've kind of plateaued about that and trying to go really fast and
Correct.
extreme.
Correct.
Right.
And so, they have had success. They find themselves maybe off path. They do associate with a bit of that lone wolfism. And then, they're looking for, I guess, a productive group, right? A healthy group to be able to be part of. And being willing to also sort of just surrender as well to a bit of the process, because we've had some members in the past, and this is the interesting thing, where we've had members in the past who have been easily able to pay, but they came in and it was really just a self-serving exercise. They just wanted to tap into our network and promote their stuff, and it was just about themselves. And so because we're about that balance of yin and yang, we want to help you, but at the same time, you got to be willing to also contribute back, And sometimes that comes in actually a few rounds. So this is why we have like a 81% like return rate, right? Is that some people don't hit their stride until maybe the second or third rounds, but they got so much out of the first round, they keep coming back. And for those that maybe it didn't work for them, it was probably because of what I mentioned, whereby they might be trying to engage, but it's really just self-serving, and so the culture and the group itself just don't respond, right? And so they just self-qualify themselves out or self-disqualify. So yeah, we've definitely focused a lot more on being discerning. With
they might be trying to engage, but it's really just self-serving, and so the culture of the group itself just
right? Adam,
and so they just self-qualify themselves out.
Is that you playing the video, or?
So yeah, we've definitely focused a lot more on being discerning.
I don't know if you can hear us, Adam.
Yeah.
All right, Kevin. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. So then, I think, I'm trying. I know there's a lot of people in the Bitcoin community that are, listening. So, I identify as somebody who's been kind of a lone wolf, or a person that's just been very choosy with the team that I join. I know, a friend of Faia, Brad Jasper. He's basically like a prolific full stack developer, and he could like build an entire app or build like a social media app that took like a whole entire team by himself.
It's
Adam,
frozen.
Sorry, yeah, we can hear you, man.
Yeah, we can hear you. You're good. But then, I feel that using Brad as an example, that his able to execute as an individual actually kind of was a hindrance, because I don't think he got a lot of feedback on his product launch with a BSV from other team members, and I think that it didn't get as much traction as the Palpings and the Twitches of the world, who I think did have, obviously they have teams that are all giving feedback, and it's not just one developer in their own room just going off their own intuitions about product.
Exactly. No, and that's a good point as well. I think what I see in sort of the development world is there's a lot of coders, developers, engineers, who are so good at what they do, and they don't maybe put value on the people side. And so I often talk about this in regards to Faia, and why I called Faia, is that we bring the fire to wood. Wood is the product, right? So the stronger the wood, the stronger the fire. So even the clients that we sort of work with, we look at, okay, what type of wood do they have? What can we do with it to add, fire to it, to help it grow, to manage the fire, furnace for the fire, using those.
I think we bring the understanding of human beings there, because this is my intuition. I think I've had this since I think we already seen like just the history of Bitcoin. It's basically a bunch of economists trying to create communities and like social groups. And with that, it's just weird, right? You just have a bunch of capitalists talking about capitalism and why socialism sucks. It's just like, this is just not like a very pleasant or like going to be a long-lived community. But I also have this insight. It's that basically what I'm seeing is that you have a bunch of, back-end and front-end developers, and that's just what they are. They're just like engineers. And then they're all trying to create a social media app. But that's not who they are. They're just like engineers, right? And then they're just like, oh, look at this feature, look at that feature, or whatever. And that's my intuition, is that there is somewhat of a cargo cult mentality that Bitcoiners are just so eager and impatient about becoming tech and then having the big wins like Facebook and Google and Twitter and stuff like that. But I'm like, well, you got to be patient. We can't just go from, we just have this protocol 2 years ago, and now we have Facebook on the blockchain, right?
Exactly.
But also the second time, I don't think we have the right people yet, because everybody is really back-end kind of protocol developer types. And then these are not the types of people that they're not like an Evan Spiegel type, to where, he's a cool guy, or, Facebook or Mark Zuckerberg, and he's like enthralled, he's in the middle of a very social environment at Harvard, and he's trying to get into frats and like all the other stuff, right? So those guys are naturally in social environments, and they're building tools to serve, college students in a social environment. And right now, I don't feel like we're there. But I think the things that we can help people and say that, this is why this is kind of flawed. Maybe you don't want to go forward with this, and you just want to stick to just making some API or some developer tool, or maybe to find a middle ground. The developer community is a community, and the early adopter enthusiast community is a community as well. So maybe that's
exactly different types of communities, and that's something that we'll be probably putting out. Is like putting out even maybe some toolkits for people to evaluate sort of where they're at, if they've got a business that involves a community of some sorts.
Or the who. Because
exactly.
I feel that a lot of times that even with the Unwriters and the Twetches, they're so eager to go mainstream and to get mainstream in, or to talk. They try to force it or talk about mainstream stuff. But I think what Faia and you and me can help with this community is helping people, to come to terms and to really identify who their real community is. Because I think with Twetch and Palping, the real community is developers, businesses, and early adopters. I think that's who their real community is. And I think we need to make that explicit so they can make the correct decisions, product decisions, feature decisions.
100%. And I agree. I think that is something definitely that even in the past, who we've worked with, right? Because the discernment part, right? The discernment is something that comes with, asking who, right? Like, who is the people that we are looking to attract, work with, et cetera. It can be applied to so many different realms. And that's probably where our strengths lie, right? In being able to answer that question for people, for clients. And then, of course, the creators, the builders, the developers, we consider them the wood, right? So they can focus on the what. But you need to ask those other questions, and that's definitely where we can help as well.
Yeah, because, I feel that to bring balance to the thing, there is somewhat of a developer coder maximalism in Bitcoin. But, an app or code is not what a business makes. You still need somebody to sell that to, or somebody to buy it. And I think I actually think that's the hard part. I think I'm not a developer, but I think there's a lot of developers and coders in Bitcoin, and building an app. It seems like it can happen in an afternoon or a week, but finding a community and finding paying customers, real paying customers, to me, that is actually the holy grail that people are trying to find that they can't, right? Trying to find that use case or that customer pain point or that real community that actually needs this. And this is me kind of like talking my book a little bit, but I think it's really true, because everybody just says, learn to code, learn to code, learn to code, learn to code. But I'm like, there's a plethora, there's a glut of coders in blockchain and Bitcoin, but what there isn't is real customers and real people and real communities. So I think Faia and your perspective is something that the bringing the humanity to blockchain is the missing piece.
Yep. And this is it's good that you touch on that, and we'll probably start to wrap up here as well. With the humanity side, with the people side, it is it's sort of the saving grace, right? While everybody else is sort of looking at the tech, and the tech is important, but one thing I did when I started the pack was I started with the who, right? Asking that. And we started with a community, a group around a simple problem or idea. Before I had any product, before I had any sort of process, right? I just put it out. I was like, hey guys, I'm going through this problem right now. Does anybody else, sort of want to like band together and sort of we just, achieve our goals over a set period of time? I said, in order to test this idea out, I'm going to put my PayPal account up, and I'm going to get you to just essentially put in any amount that you think that something like this would be of use to you. So before creating anything, I found paying customers, because I said I needed at least, I call it the rule of three. You find at least 3 paying customers before you build anything. Because I've seen so many startups like spend freaking 6 months, 12 months, years even, right? Pouring money into something that eventually just launches to crickets because you're going off a whole bunch of assumptions, right? Whereas, now of course there are situations where that can work, but in my case, essentially I started with a community, and then only now, like 4 or 5 years later, are we actually looking at formal products. Like that's 4 to 5 years later. And this whole time we've actually done like the community stuff and processes and rituals, no formal products. The only product is probably just the accelerator aspect, where we have a series of webinars, but even that was informed by the members.
Yeah.
The members came in.
So you started with solving your own problem, and then finding other people that had your problem, and then finding what technology stack or what, productivity, application or collaboration works. Whereas Bitcoin, things are kind of backwards to where everybody has the tools and they're trying to find people to sell it to.
Solution with them trying to find.
Yeah. So, sorry, say it again.
So they've got like a solution, like Bitcoin, blockchain,
trying to find a problem. Yeah. So I guess to kind of wrap things up. So basically, I think for if you're watching and you are an individual, that I think you're not ready, or you don't have a team to join, and you've been like a very high performer as an individual. But if you want to like get taken to the next level, and you want to have a group to hold you accountable and to kind of support you, then they should look into the pack.
And I've just put the link in there into the chats.
Yep. And then also, I think on the BSV side, if you're a developer and you're skilled in building applications, but you don't have a Twitter following, or you're kind of you are a lone wolf. You don't really have just friends or community to kind of help launch something, or to try to solve to help solve problems for, then we can probably be a bridge to kind of connect
100%.
you.
Well said, Kevin, and I've put that up on the chats as well. And then Adam, do you want to just also maybe close us off as well?
Yeah, it's been a few technical issues with the headphones, and all good. Yeah, so for me, I would just like to say really, really appreciate and grateful for the opportunity to have a chat with you guys. So I know I'm in Australia, Kevin's in the States, and you're in Singapore. So it's really great to be able to connect, and it feels like we are in the same room and connecting, even though
we're on the Ring of Faiā.
The Ring of Faiā. I like it.
No, the literal Ring of Faiā.
I love it. And it's so great, and it's really great how I talked to it briefly with Kevin and George as well, to a certain extent, is we can still be individual with our own characteristics and personalities, but stronger together, and be vulnerable as well. Because I know I'm definitely practicing that myself and still learning. And we're talking about ego and projection, because I've got a background in psychology, and I'm learning so much every single day about myself and about other people and within groups and teams. And for me, the context of this, even what we're doing right in this moment, we're doing a live, it's streaming, we're having a conversation, and adding value, I'm sure, with our conversation. For me, how it all ties together with what Faia's doing, what we're doing as a team, and also the pack. I'm super grateful, and just want to say thank you for the opportunity.
Yeah. Oh, well, as we're going to bring up a point, I mean, there's a great point about, respecting our differences, because I think in Bitcoin, there's a lot of groupthink. And if anything, instead of having, BSVers having their own group, I don't know, maybe there is value of getting them out of their echo chamber and to work with normal people and to kind of acid test all these people's ideologies or their product ideas to see if normal people use them.
Exactly. And that's why also in the pack, we're very big on like just diversity. And it's interesting because that it just kind of naturally happened. But we had people from so many different backgrounds, attracted into the pack. But of course, the commonality was, Kevin, you called it the black sheep or the lone wolf. Essentially, I think we all obviously resonate with that. And even our involvement in BSV, right? Yeah. Like that, we are literally the black sheep of the entire crypto ecosystem.
Yeah.
So, that's kind of telling, So, yeah, with that, I think, guys, we did pretty well, an hour and a half. For anybody who's watching, who's still watching, thanks for tuning in.
Thank you.
We might do more of these type of setups because I quite enjoyed it. Maybe we might be able to bring in some of our clients too, people we've worked with. It was a good setup. So thanks to you guys as well for being on with me today.
Awesome.
All right, see ya.